Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Child Anxiety FAQ podcast. FAQ stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and I'm answering listener questions about child and teen anxiety. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I have been working with kids and families for more than 30 years as a preschool teacher, parent educator, family case manager, clinical counselor, and now as the owner and operator of Child Anxiety Support, where I help parents of anxious kids. This episode's question is, how do I help my anxious child deal with worries about real life events? This person gave some example of real life events, and what she meant are things that are worth worrying about. For example, if you live in San Francisco and your child is worried about earthquakes, or if your child is worried about climate crisis, or something else that is a real legitimate worry, how do we help our children live in a world that is often scary and often not in our control in some way? This is a really good question, and it's a really hard question for us loving, empathetic parents who want to ease our child's way. And if you have an anxious child, they are well aware that things are challenging out there, that there are legitimate, scary things happening, and that we can't protect them from some of these scary things. How do we talk to them about it without making them more worried? And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about my own experience as an anxious child, and it made me think back to 1983 when I was 13 years old, and there was the premiere of this movie on ABC. So it was on network television called The Day After. And the day after was a huge event. There were all these commercials about this important television event, and back then, for you youngsters, we didn't have TiVo, obviously. We barely had VCRs. And so if there was a big TV event, you would ready yourself and you would sit down and you would watch this big television event together as a family. And this particular movie was the day after a nuclear holocaust. So it was after the advent of World War III. And it terrified me. It terrified me. And I became so upset by it. I had trouble sleeping. I had trouble thinking. And plus it was middle school because I was 13, and I was just a mess. And I look back and think, who thought that was a good idea to sit the anxious kid in front of this television show about nuclear holocaust? On what planet was that a good idea? So part of this is understanding that there is a difference between avoidance and protection, which is avoidance is, let's never even talk about scary things. And protection is, we're going to inevitably have to sometimes confront scary things. So let's not go out and seek those scary things like nuclear holocaust. The fact that we were in the Cold War at the time was part of the zeitgeist. It was part of the world I was living in. It was part of the soup I was swimming in. There was no avoiding that. There's no way that you can be a child going to history classes or government classes and not learning about some of that. But there was no reason to sit down and actually overwhelm said child with more information than she was capable of absorbing, right? That's part of it. So if you have an anxious child, obviously they're going to know about things like earthquakes and forest fires and climate crisis and kidnappings. And should I go on with all the scary things? But we do not need to force them over and over to confront this in artificial ways. That is to say, it is one thing to know about fire safety. It is one thing to know about what to do in the case of an earthquake. It is one thing to know the value of recycling. It's quite another thing to entertain ourselves, entertain in air quotes, by watching a movie that makes a spectacle of that. I know there are disaster movies that are more or less considered entertaining. And it's not just The Day After, which was this hyper realistic movie about nuclear holocaust. It could also be whatever disaster in New York kind of movie there is. Like The Quiet Place, you could maybe watch because aliens are fairly far-fetched. But a movie that's, and I can't remember the name of any of them, that's about an earthquake where California drops off the side of the country. There is a movie about that. It probably stars The Rock. I feel like it does. In any case, maybe that's not a movie to watch if you live in California and you have an anxious child, or maybe not a child of a certain age. Maybe that's a movie they can choose to watch when they're older and have some skills as far as handling anxiety. I think about this a lot around the topic of climate crisis because a lot of the education we do with kids is really terrifying. And what do we expect an 8-year-old to do about it? What do we expect an 8-year-old to do about climate crisis when we adults don't know what we're doing about it? So let's be cautious about saddling our 8-year-olds with this information. There is a segment on Sesame Street, and I don't know if Sesame Street is still showing it. I haven't watched Sesame Street since my kids were that age, but I remember watching it when I was a preschool teacher. So it was quite a while ago. And in it, there's a kid who's washing his hands. And while he's washing his hands, there is a fish that is losing water. So the kid is leaving the water running. And as they do, the fish is in this environment and the water is dissipating and the fish is about to drown because the kid is washing their hands for too long. And it's this very direct, if you wash your hands too long, fish will die. And I remember even at the time, and when I was a preschool teacher, I was in my 20s, that I thought this is probably a lot for some 3 and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds to be watching. For a lot of kids, it will be really helpful. Oh, I see. I don't want to waste water. It harms fish. For some kids, it's going to make them hard to do anything around water. It's going to make them terrified of ever using too much water. It will make some of them afraid to run through a sprinkler or get in a swimming pool. Is that wasteful? It will make some of them afraid to not finish their water and dump it down the sink. Like for some anxious kids, that is more information, more intrusive thoughts than they need. On the other hand, we shouldn't just avoid Sesame Street because maybe it's going to trigger an anxious child. So we do need to know that we also are going to have kids who get triggered by information. That information tips them over into a level of anxiety that we had no idea that it would hit them that way. We need to be prepared for that. Some of the things that we can do is remind our children that they are children. And children are not responsible for great big decisions, and they are not responsible for managing great big disasters. The adults do that. If you have a child who says, what will happen if we have an earthquake? Because I watched a movie and The Rock said that this earthquake is going to cause California to drop into the sea, and we live in Los Angeles. What do I do? What do I do? What we say to that child is the grown-ups have it. The grown-ups are taking care of it. We have got a plan. Now, this is true even if you don't necessarily have a plan or you're actually really concerned about that worry and you're not sure it's going to go well. We need to let them know this is not for you to worry about. This is not something that is on your child's shoulders. The grown-ups have it. You do not need to keep reassuring them either. You can just remind them that is a grown-up worry and the grown-ups have it. As a 13-year-old watching the day after and in a panic, what I needed to know was the grown-ups are also concerned, and so we are using our grown-up powers to take care of it. Now, you and I both know that the grown-ups didn't have it in hand as much as they needed to. We still don't. But that does not belong to the child. And the reason for that is children need to have a modicum of safety in those big events in order to manage the everyday worries that are their responsibility. My worry could not be nuclear disarmament. I was 13. I needed to worry about the things that were already worrying me, which was frankly my French homework. Very stressful. That was plenty. I did not need Jason Robard slowly dying of radiation poisoning in my head too. But once it was there, what I needed to hear was The grown-ups have this. In fact, that movie was to freak grown-ups out enough to remind us that we need to take care of this for our children. And we are taking care of this because I love you and your other parent loves you or your grandparent loves you or your teachers love you or people love children and we are taking care of it for the children. If you have a child who is privileged enough that they are more or less protected, allow them to rest in that protection. I had a friend a long time ago who had a child who was very worried about something. I can't remember what it was. It might have been like hunger, it might have been climate crisis. It was something big. It was something outside of this child's control. And this was a little kid. I want to say, I can do the math here. I think that they were 5. And they said to their mother, I am afraid of this thing. Please tell me I am safe. And that mother said, you are safe, but many children are not. Night, night, sweetie. And I remember when my friend told me this, and I said, what did you just do? Your child cannot protect these other children who are not protected. Your child cannot actually feed the hungry. Your child can't do that. Why are you putting that on their shoulders? I mean, you can't do anything about it. Why are you making your child worry about it? These are the kinds of little white lies that we do in order to help our child have the strength to deal with things. And again, this is not true for every child. Some children are not that anxious and they will be inspired by need. We need to judge it for our child. If your child says, I feel too guilty to sleep at night because I can't stop thinking about the homeless, how does that help them to say, yeah, it's terrible. Unhoused people are not protected. Well, good luck to you. Instead, we can do something like many loving, caring people are also concerned about the people who are unhoused. And I know that one thing that we can do is, and you could say, we can collect coats. We can donate your outgrown snowshoes. We can put this much of our money aside and donate it to this organization that helps. Because what we're trying to do is give them some hope, some belief that they can overcome those scary big things. When we talk about that Mr. Rogers quote, look for the helpers, right? We say, if you're afraid, look for the helpers, the people who are helping. We can also teach our children how to be the helpers. And then we need to let them know it's a help. Even if we ourselves know it's a drop in the bucket. Even if we ourselves know, but we're up against a big machine that makes this so much harder. If we want children who will fight for the good, if we want children who will be helpers, then we need to give them the hope that that help matters. We need to let them know you don't have to worry about earthquakes because we grown-ups are doing our part and you are allowed to worry about multiplication tables. We are working very hard to protect the people who are less protected, and you can help in this small way, and it makes a real difference. You are a helper. You are a brave person who is making a wonderful difference in the world. That's what we need to do for our anxious children and with our anxious children. And if they're really afraid, we can help them write letters, we can help them write postcards, we can help them with petitions, but we can also remind them that it is not their job to fix it, that big people, grown-up people, smart people are working on fixing, and that one day they will be ready to join in if they're not ready yet. All right? This can be difficult. It can run up against some of your values, and that is something to think about too. I know many of you are activists and you want to raise children who are activists. Again, look for places to give them hope. Know that hope is much more of a motivator than fear. Fear is paralyzing. And if you have an anxious child, the fear can be especially paralyzing. So find ways to help them feel part of the success, part of the action, and also let them know the grown-ups are taking care. You are allowed to rest in the care. If you have thoughts about this particular episode or any of my episodes of the podcast, feel free to reach out to me. You can go to my website, childanxietysupport.com, and message me there. You can direct message me on various social media. And I hope you will subscribe and like this podcast and perhaps share it with anyone who you think might find it helpful. I'll see you next time.